I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. It is great to be with you here. Hopefully you had yourself a great week. We're going to look back at the week that was in Canadian agriculture. And hey, so much great feedback from last week's first show here on RealCo Radio. And it's great to be with you here again. I just really appreciate all the feedback and how everybody's really enjoying the fact that there's a little bit more ag programming here and a little bit more real ag to enjoy. And if you get a chance, go to RealAgriculture.com over the weekend here. We're not able to squeeze all the different things that happen in agriculture into one 1 hour show. But if you go to RealAgriculture.com, you can definitely find full coverage of the week that was, I should say. So we got a great show for you here today. Lots to discuss and break down. We're going to hear from Sobkowich. He's with the Western Grain Elevator Association. We're going to hear a conversation that he had with Real Agriculture's Lindsay Smith about how this decision that Health Canada has made on Lambda-cy products, Matador and Silencer, how that is untenable for farmers. And he's got the reasons why. We'll also hear today from Katrina Schmidt. She is with FMC Canada to talk about how, they've got a product that is insecticide that is not Lambda-cy based. And we're going to hear from Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. I chatted with him last week in Ottawa. We'll listen to what he has to say. And then I've got some thoughts on a recent Real Agri-Studies survey that we've done where we asked Canadian farmers about how they feel about the support that the current federal government has given to agriculture. And it's not going to shock any of you, but the number is quite low. It's on the low side of the equation. I'm being kind, of course. But if you have any feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's get to Lindsay Smith's discussion with Sobkowich of the Western Grain Elevator Association, talking about Lambda-cy not being on label for feed use.
This is a very difficult situation that's been created for us here. It's not been created by producers. It's not been created by the grain handlers. It's not been created by the life science companies or the livestock sector. It's been created by bureaucratic timelines more than anything, and so it has to do with a decision from PMRA to bring a new label into force in April of 2023 that is going to disallow Lambda for use on feed grains, but will allow farmers to continue to apply it on grain used for human consumption. So that decision requires farmers to know if what they're growing is going to be used for food or feed, which isn't really known. We don't see how a farmer could possibly know, how their quality is going to come out at the end of the year, and also there are market factors that play in as to whether product is used for food or feed. So, that's a big question mark that a farmer would have when making pesticide application decisions. And then even if they did have some certainty there, understanding that a portion of all grains are eligible for feed, like screenings from cereal crops and meal byproducts from canola, for example, go into the feed market. So it's a really difficult situation that the government has put us in here.
Your organization handles the vast majority, within your membership, the vast majority of bulk grain. What does it look like right now at the delivery point as far as declarations of following label use and those sorts of things? What does that look like right now?
So the producer declaration that's in place and has been in place since kernel visual distinguishability was removed in 2008 has a clause in it that that basically says that Canadian grain handlers are obligated to follow Canadian regulations, and grain producers in Canada delivering to any of the facilities of the WGEA member companies are required to declare that their deliveries have been treated with crop protection products and active ingredients registered for Canada in accordance with the label directions. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't change. And so the obligation on the producer is to make sure that they're following the label. And that's where the conundrum comes in, is that the farmer is required to follow the label, but how can he possibly follow the label when he doesn't necessarily know where his product is going? So, it's an untenable situation for growers. They're not going to know whether their product is going to be going for food or feed necessarily. And even if they have a good sense that it's going to be going for food consumption, the byproducts could and probably will be going for feed consumption. So it places them in a situation where if they do apply it and then they're delivering it to an elevator and it's potentially going for feed, now they haven't followed the label instructions properly.
But the next part of this is that the United States also reviewed Lambda-cy and came to a different conclusion and allows the use of Lambda-cy products for food and feed. What situation does that create for crop coming into Canada from the U.S.?
You raise the exact question as it relates to the U.S. versus Canada, and exactly what does that mean? We know that if it is used on feed products that could be coming into Canada, that it could be coming in with lambda residues or having been treated with lambda, coming into the livestock feed market, which is not would not be compliant with Canadian the state of affairs with Canadian label application. So what does that mean? Is it going to be enforced by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in some way for imports of feed grains? It wasn't that long ago that we were importing a lot of corn from the United States into the Alberta livestock feed areas, and so if that happens again, because market conditions make it economical, does that mean now somehow there's going to be testing of that grain as it enters the livestock sector here in Canada, or are they not testing, and therefore what's the enforceability on that? And I guess the other question is, what kind of a playing field does it create, or unlevel playing field does it create between Canadian producers and U.S. producers, when on each side of the border they will be following different labels and coming up with different market opportunities?
That was Wade Sobkowich of the Western Grain Elevator Association talking to RealAgriculture's Lindsay Smith. We're going to continue this conversation about Lambda-cy when we hear from Katrina Schmidt of FMC Canada coming up next. You're listening to RealAg on the Weekend.
Hey, I'm Kelvin Hepner, and I just wanted to give you a heads up about a new project that we are working on here at RealAgriculture together with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, or CAPI. A lot of what we do at RealAg, in many ways, is simply connecting dots between different pieces of information, different people, experiences, eras, different parts of the country in some cases, and we connect these dots or make these connections in an attempt to create a clearer or more informed picture of our world when it comes to the big issues in farming, in ranching, food, agriculture. It's also the goal of a new agriculture policy-focused podcast that we are excited to launch together with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We're calling it the Ag Policy Connection, and it's going to feature in-depth panel discussions about the policies and issues that shape agriculture and farming today and into the future. We're going to bring together the people that were in the meeting room and as they sometimes say, in the meeting after the meeting. They had a hand in making those policies and making those big decisions. On each episode, we're going to talk about what led to a specific policy change, how it happened and came together, whether it has stood the test of time or needs to be changed as we look back and look ahead. For example, we're planning different episodes on the history of Canada's ag policy framework, the big federal provincial agreement that governs most of what government does in agriculture. The end of the Canadian Wheat Board is also on the list. Trade deal negotiations, the nitty-gritty of the Canada-EU trade deal, for example, as well the decision to opt out of RBST hormone use in Canadian dairy and more. And of course, we always welcome ideas from you and your feedback along the way. So whether you're a fellow ag policy nerd or not, stay tuned. The first episodes of the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by RealAgriculture and the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. They'll be showing up here on Real Agriculture and in your podcast feed on your podcast player shortly.
And welcome back to RealAg on the weekend. We just heard from Wade Sobkowich with the Western Grain Elevator Association. Now let's catch up with Katrina Schmidt. She is with FMC Canada to talk about, without some of these Lambda-cy products, do we have enough product like Pounce out there? Because I've heard from a lot of you saying, well, this is a real concern because will there actually be enough supply to backfill what's been the gap created by the fact that Lambda-cy is having some label issues? So let's hear what Katrina had to say.
Yeah, well, first of all, Shaun, we recognize how anxious growers must be with the impact that Lambda-cy halothane products and their exit from the market this year will mean for their choices going forward. And so when we heard of the news, of course, Pounce for sure is a product that is excellent for flea beetle control in canola. And I would say that FMC Canada was already planning on greater supply of Pounce and some of our other insecticides given the trajectory of their adoption in the market and in anticipation of potentially elevated pest pressure in 2023. And the other thing I would also note is that FMC Canada has a solid track record over the past couple of seasons supporting the market by delivering more volume in season when, pest pressure arose. So we are already looking at substantial volumes to supply of Pounce for this coming season. And so it's just a matter of really working behind the scenes with everyone in supply chain and operations, logistics, to see just how much more we can deliver to the market. But if I can give at least, one frame of point of view is when we looked at our sales from this past year for Pounce, we were already looking to supply basically double what we, sold into the market this past year.
And will that be enough to satisfy trying to fill the hole left by some of those Lambda-cy products not being on the market?
That's a great question. So I would say the double that we were looking to supply was just looking at, more share of the market, considering that existing products would still be available. So we have gone back and are looking to even increase that amount of supply for the market. And it's going to be a question of what is that X factor that we are able to deliver. Because flea beetles are an early season pest, that really means that we have to have all of the product available in the market, basically up until that April timeframe, right, for growers to use. So that's the critical piece that we're working through with right now. But I would say right now, everything that we're looking to do, which includes a task force of all of the people that I just mentioned, departments, we're looking at this very critically and meeting weekly on this subject. And so right now, some of the feedback that we're getting is certainly making me optimistic in terms of how much more volume we can supply for the coming season. But it's also, we're looking to ground that with our customers, right? So we're activating our sales teams to go out and converse with customers and try to understand what are their supply needs and purchase needs for the coming season, and then marry that with sort of our top-down view from the market perspective.
A lot of times we think about these products based on how we use them, and we don't remember that, there's a lot of different pulls on actives and products in a number of different directions in terms of insects and crop. I've mentioned canola and flea beetles. What are some of the other uses from a crop perspective and from an insect perspective that where there's going to be pulls on the pounce supply?
Sure. Well, Pounce is also a great product for cutworm control, right? So that's another area that, the product is often used in. But we also recognize that, Pounce is used up to the 5-leaf stage in canola. So when we think about other pests that could occur in the market, that's where some of our other products that we have, whether it's Coragen Max, Saigon 480AG, and we're just launching carbine insecticide, which will be new for the market for aphids and lygus and tarnished plant bugs. So we're looking at everything in terms of, again, a broad spectrum insecticide like Lambda-cy being out. Where else can our portfolio fit in? And so, again, when we're looking at potentially elevated demand on our other insecticides, we're dialing that into the plan completely.
One thing we learned through the last 3 years, when there is a potential, whether it's reality or it's our perception, things tend to get sort of hoarded, okay? And we saw that in the 22 crop with some, very heavily used crop protection products where, farmers were scared they wouldn't be able to get access to something. And so there was, maybe I'll order a little bit more than I usually would just in case I don't get, my total order. How do you ensure that, you try to prevent as much as possible that kind of situation happening at the retail point? Because obviously you take the order from the retail, you deliver the inventory to the retail, and you kind of lose control of it after that. So is there a step you can take based on the learnings of 22 and 21?
Ultimately, I think we just want to make sure that, customers sort of look at this, practically as much as possible. And I think communication will be key for us with our customers. So just being able to provide that dialogue with them in terms of the quantity of supply once we, again, receive their forecasts and then their purchase orders, from us. We'll be looking at that holistically and obviously trying to spread that out as much as possible. But you're right, once it gets into the retailer's hands, right, that's where you could get some of that, hoarding behavior, whether, it's within their retail network or perhaps at the grower level. But I think, again, the best that we could do is really just, keep the communication lines flowing with our customers so that, if there is, more product coming or potentially even product that's coming a little bit later and maybe it's servicing, a slightly later market timing, maybe in the north or something like that, that at least gives them some confidence potentially to move some product around knowing that there's, going to be some more coming. So I think communication will just be a really key factor for us this year.
That was Katrina Schmidt with FMC Canada talking about their supplies of Pounce. If you do want to hear the entire conversation with Katrina, you can go to RealAgriculture.com. When it comes to this whole issue around Lambda-cy and feed versus food use, Wade Sobkowich really sums it up in the sense that the farmer doesn't know when they're selling to the grain elevator whether or not they have followed the label based on what the intentions are for that product down the value chain. This is where decisions are being made that create a whole bunch of at 100,000 feet, sure. In the details, no, doesn't make sense. And then you tie in the U.S. side of that, how the U.S. farmer can use Lambda-cy products because the EPA said the product is safe, and Canada is taking a different position on this, which is really creating some competitive imbalance. So what does EPA see that Health Canada doesn't see? And does Health Canada have some sort of data that says, the EPA is wrong? Still waiting for that as well. Meanwhile, on the farm, you're impacted. This is something that I hope gets rectified before 2023 planting and seeding begins. But let's just hope it's not, the worst case scenario. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but a full pullback of all products. That would really suck. Let's take a break. We'll have more coming up next on the RealAg on the Weekend.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
There has been recent polls showing that the Conservative Party of Canada is really in a pretty good position if an election were called tomorrow. And there has been definitely a decline in maybe the bloom is off the rose, however, whatever metaphor you want to use, for Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party of Canada. It has been 8 years, and similar to the Stephen Harper government, there reaches a time where Canadians tend to look at voting somebody out as opposed to voting somebody in as one way to look at it. Of course, we've got the real scandal going right now in terms of Chinese influence on the last Canadian election. Of course, that's playing itself out with a lot of controversy. But last week, I got a chance to interview for the first time the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, possibly, we'll see how it goes, but possibly the next Prime Minister of Canada, if he gets his way. It is Pierre Poilievre. He spoke at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture meeting, and I had a chance to interview him right before he hit the stage. Here's our conversation. Okay, you're going to address the delegates here in a second. What's your main message that you want everybody to leave home with here today?
We have to bring home more affordable food production to Canada by getting the heavy weight of government taxes, regulation, and deficit-driven interest rate hikes off the backs of our farmers. That's it in a heartbeat. Let's bring it home.
Okay. There's a lot of talk here today about how we really kind of unlock the potential of agriculture. A lot of times people talk about the Barton Report and growing the industry from a trade perspective. How exactly do we make that happen through your lens of the Conservative Party of Canada?
Well, we have to lower the cost that governments impose on our farmers. Most commodities are internationally priced, so our farmers are price takers, and they have to compete with people who don't pay carbon taxes, don't have the same regulatory red tape, don't face the same tariffs on the fertilizer that they use to stimulate growth. So we need to reduce those costs to unleash more affordable farm production and outcompete other countries around the world. And I'm going to make that possible. We're also going to get more farm labor available by speeding up and lowering the bureaucracy to bring in temporary foreign workers and then turn those workers into permanent residents so that we can expand the workforce on Canada's farms.
Where does climate change fit into those initiatives?
Well, we have to give farmers credit for the carbon they capture, for the cutting-edge methods that they use, zero-till farming and others that actually capture and bury carbon beneath the soil where it originated. And we need to acknowledge that farmers are as energy efficient as they can be right now. They're investing in technology to get better. Punitive taxes won't improve the situation. It will only worsen it.
Do you believe in incentives to help farmers, assist them in changing some of the practices on the farm when it comes to some of these things? Or do you believe more in let the market work its way through and those changes will come?
Well, both. I think we should bring in market-based incentives to help farmers reduce their emissions and increase their food output per acre and per unit of energy consumed.
Okay. Have you had any discussions with the government putting pressure on them when it comes to the fertilizer the fertilizer tariffs that were imposed on Eastern Canadian farmers, and what should happen with those dollars and that fertilizer tariff going forward?
Well, John Barlow, my shadow minister of agriculture, has been the leading voice for farmers against these fertilizer tariffs and in favor of using the proceeds already collected to boost farmers who've had to pay the price. We don't believe that farmers should pay a burden for this policy, and in fact, all it's done is has forced more food production out of our country and forced higher prices for our consumers. So we would reverse the tariff, and we would also ensure that the funds already collected go back to farmers.
We've been hearing concern from certain members of our audience about the bill legislation that would basically take negotiating supply management off the table in future trade negotiations. Do you support that legislation?
We supported studying it in committee. We obviously want to support our supply managed sectors, but we at the same time have to expand trade. So we agreed to let the bill go to committee, and it will study it there to find out whether or not it's worth proceeding with, or if there are better ways to promote exports of non-supply managed commodities at the same time as supporting our supply managed producers.
What about the grocery code of conduct? What is that something you support, and what do you see? We're going to see the grocery CEOs in front of, I believe, the House Ag Committee. Different parties putting them to task in terms of food prices. What do you want to see from this?
We want to hold them accountable for the low prices they pay producers and the high prices they charge consumers. Perhaps it means pushing for more competition in the grocery business that would bid up the prices that farmers get to wholesale their product, but also allow for lower prices for consumers. We need more competition, and that's the answer.
But how do you can't regulate profits at the grocery level. What kind of what would this code actually entail?
Well, one thing we have to look at is, is there enough competition? Is there price collusion between the major grocers? Competition is the number one driver of low prices and better service. And right now we don't have enough competition. So Conservatives are going to use this study to find out if there's a way we can expand competition, both for the benefit of producers who sell to grocers and consumers who buy from them.
Mr. Poilievre, thanks so much for taking some time before you hit the stage, and thanks so much for coming to the CFA meeting.
Excellent. Let's bring it home. Thank you.
That was Pierre Poilievre talking to me at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture meeting last week in Ottawa about some of his priorities when it comes to agriculture. So definitely some things in there that I think are going to resonate with many of you in terms of looking at regulations. I think having more of a slant to reducing regulation, being a little bit more fiscally responsible when it comes to a budgeting perspective. But there's, I think, still some questions. One of the things that in the general address that Mr. Poilievre talked about was talking about how the USMCA was not a good deal, that the CUSMA agreement, the NAFTA 2.0, whatever you want to call it, wasn't really good. I'm paraphrasing how he put that, but he definitely had some concerns about it without much detail. If we are going to be really fiscal hawks, what does that mean for the future when it comes to farm programming? That's a consideration. There is a discussion about repealing the carbon tax. That is definitely something that is very, very much in his mandate. But he's going to have to convince Canadians in the general election that he is serious about climate change. Because if you look at the majority of Canadians, they are concerned about that. But the Liberal government has done a fantastic job of tying you are only serious about climate change if you're in favor of a carbon tax. He's going to have to detach those two. That's a challenge politically for sure. And I think one of the things that's brought Mr. Poilievre to prominence is the fact that he's an attack dog. He's that little dog that nips at your heels, and he's really, really good in question period and on some of the committees. Being that really, he's a great communicator. And so how does that translate to being the leader of Canada when you are the person that is being attacked by the other side? We're going to be interested to follow if there's a bit of a transition here for him in the course of an election and post-election as well. Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about some recent Real Agri Studies data. That's our market research arm, where Justin Funk and I found out that you have a pretty low opinion of the support the federal government provides to agriculture. We're going to talk about it when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag on the Weekend.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. Now, we just heard from Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Some of you are likely big fans, some of you not such big fans of Mr. Poilievre. Let's park that for a second. And you know what? If you do have feedback on that, I would love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Let's continue, though, on the other side of the aisle to talk about how I know how you feel about the current federal government, because you told us in our recent Real Agri Studies Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. Okay, so every 2 months we go out to farmers across the country and we ask them about their sentiment on economic matters, willingness to invest in the farm, how they feel about their farm profitability, mental health. And one of the things we also ask them about is their assessment of the federal government. And in September, November, and January, you told us that only 2% of Canadian farmers, 2% across the country, believe that the Canadian federal government is doing an excellent job of supporting Canadian agriculture. So if that's how you feel, you are definitely in the minority. The number's been very, very consistent. Okay? So when we look at, this is across Canada. So how we calculate the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index is we take, in this example, the people that said the government's doing excellent, we subtract the people that said they're doing very, very poor, and we times by 100. It gives us a rating 0 out of 200. So 100 is neutral, okay? So if we look at the rating of the assessment of the federal government, how would you rate the federal government's ability to support the Canadian agriculture industry? If you have primary crops, you're saying 22.5. If you have primarily livestock, you say 44.7. And if you've got both, if you're a mixed farm, you're saying 24.6. The majority of people that answered the survey that are primarily livestock are actually beef farmers, cattle producers. So interesting that, if you look at how people feel about the current federal government, 44.7 is still very negative out of 200, but definitely better, double of how primarily crop producers feel about the current federal government. I'm not sure what that reason would be or the why to that, but it definitely shows up there. So when we look at only 2% of Canadian farmers and ranchers saying that they feel the federal government is doing an excellent job of supporting Canadian agriculture, the question is, what moves that number? Is there something the federal government could do to change your mind and maybe all of a sudden you feel that they're doing an okay job, an average job? The only thing that's really changed over the course of September, November, and January is the fact that you've said, people have changed from saying they're doing a terrible job to an average job, or average job to terrible job. The excellent has not changed. It's 2%. So if all of a sudden, and I'm not saying this would ever happen, I'm going to give this the carbon tax. This is one that grabs a lot of your attention. If all of a sudden tomorrow the federal government said we're getting rid of the carbon tax, or we're going to waive the farmer, we're going to waive farmers from having to pay the carbon tax, would that 2% change? You got to ask yourself. It's a very, very interesting question. I'm not sure it does. I think the sentiment is pretty written in concrete. It's pretty written in concrete. And maybe you disagree. Let me know. Tell me, is there a policy? Is there a decision? Is there a statement the federal government could make to allow you to change your mind on this one? You look at across ages, it's interesting. There's really no difference in terms of how people feel about the federal government. Under 35 all the way to 65 and over, it's a pretty horizontal line when it comes to the support that the federal government has. When we look at region, people in the West, a little more negative than people in the East, but barely. It's virtually the same. It's a 23.8 for the West and 27.5 for the East. So not a lot of difference. So if you're out there listening in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, and you feel that, well, of course the West doesn't approve of the federal government, but it's all those Easterners. Sorry to tell you, but I could have told you this before even getting the survey results. That's just not quite true. People in the East, not feeling very good about the current federal government. And part of the reason there has to do with how the government has handled the fertilizer tariff money. The $32 million they refused to give back directly to people that paid that fertilizer tariff. It's a huge issue right now in Eastern Canada. Here's an interesting, fascinating piece of data, though, is your approval or sentiment of the provincial government's support of the agriculture industry is better than the federal government. That wouldn't be hard, but I actually thought it'd be higher. And if we look across the country, let's look at the regional breakdown first. When it comes to how would you rate your provincial government's ability to support the agriculture industry in your province, Eastern Canada says 66.8 out of 200. So actually negative towards how their provincial governments support the agriculture industry. Out west, where we have a conservative government in Alberta, we have a conservative government in Saskatchewan, and we have a conservative government in Manitoba, it's only 98.4. It's neutral. You are neutral on how your provincial government supports the agricultural industry. That surprises me. What could the provincial governments be doing differently that would move that number higher as well? Because it's not just about the politics, because the politics is already in place. Is there a policy that is holding back? It's a question I think we're gonna send out the March version of this survey here next week, and I want to get a little bit to the why of this, because it is very, very fascinating indeed. So send me your feedback. What could the federal Liberals do to change your sentiment towards them, if anything? Is there anything? I'm doubtful, but maybe you're going to tell me. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We've got some great crop schools on our realagriculture.com website, as well as our YouTube channel. We got a pulse school, canola school, wheat school. Check it out. There's a ton of agronomic content there. As well, you can call the RealAg feedback line as well. You can dial 855-776-6147. You dial that number. you leave me a message and I get a voicemail from you. And I would love to hear your feedback on anything we chatted about here today on RealAg on the Weekend or anything else that is top of mind. Really, really appreciate it. Hope you're enjoying this brand new show where we wrap up the week and try to put a bit of a rope around it in terms of some of the interesting things that happened, some of the interesting discussions about the week ahead, and really, really talk about the industry that we all love. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg on the Weekend, and we'll chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.